Good afternoon. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Jeremy Warren. I am the chair of the EU Ingenious Cluster, and I'm also here with Bruno Rodriguez. What I want to do is introduce a little bit about the EU Ingenious Cluster. At the beginning of basically, there are 5 projects in the EU Ingenious Cluster, and they all were funded underneath the same call. 4 of them started at the same time. The 5th, BATS, started 6 months afterwards because it was actually a case in which there was funding left over, and the Commission decided that they could fund a 5th project. And so we were encouraged by the Commission to perform clustering activities. And we decided to focus mainly on collective outreach to achieve kind of a multiplier effect on our dissemination activities. And over time, it has been a very, very productive relationship because we have, over time, started talking about more collaborative efforts in the future. There have already been project submissions that have involved multiple members from across the cluster to try to mix and match different technologies in new calls. And most recently, on Zenodo, there has now been launched a EU Ingenious community, which will begin to regroup the public the papers and the public data sets that come from those 5 projects. And one of the things that we are now starting to move into is we're kind of reaching a point of, I guess you could say, kind of like an existential crisis, in the sense that VersaPrint is ending this month, TEMPEST is ending this month, and all of the other projects will be ended by the end of this year. Extended ends, when is it? September?
Extended will end in the beginning of October,
Okay.
but I think in the end of October also.
I think it's in December now. Or,
Okay.
Yeah. And so we're now reaching the point where we have to decide what we do with the cluster. And this has actually been a very interesting problem for us because, I mean, I don't know, when we went to Battery Innovation Days last year, there was a, I guess you could say, a cluster of clusters event where there were many clusters that were invited to discuss and share lessons learned and talk about the future. And one of the things that pretty much many of the battery project clusters are reaching this existential crisis in the sense of Colabat is also running out of active projects. Battery Heroes is in the same way. And usually one of the ways these clusters try to continue on is through CSA projects. But this is not necessarily a guaranteed thing. And it's essentially CSA projects in those cases are geared towards much, much larger clusters like Battery 2030. And for smaller clusters like us, we don't have, I guess you could say, the administration to handle that kind of thing. And so at this point, for a while we talked about, can we merge efforts? Can we merge clusters into one larger cluster? But at the end of the day, what we kind of eventually decided we're going to do is looking forward from the EU Ingenious experience, and we'll have a more formal decision on this in May, but we will most likely be opening it up to new battery calls or new battery projects that align with the materials, or I guess you could say the diverse toolkit approach of producing new technologies for a wide variety of different battery applications, because we don't want to step on Colabat or Battery Heroes' toes. They have different orientations, and so we will, do everything we can to continue on. But that's kind of where we have been. You have.
I can tell another thing that could be useful aside from what we are saying, because I think we are talking in two different areas. One, it's the legacy.
Yeah.
It's how to keep the legacy of or legacy of knowledge even, because we are sharing knowledge, and in one point, if the clusters disappear, we will lose for sure what was created, what was developed. Even Zenodo, we know that it will be there, but I think it will get forgotten in the middle of.
I think it'll continue on for quite some time, because I mean it does have significant backing. And to go back to what you're saying though about the whole issue of what is the legacy. One of the whole points of this, the EU Ingenious Zenodo community, is the issue that when you look at the 5 projects, we each have our own Zenodo pages. But like if you think about it from a larger vision, it would be really nice to have a single battery repository where you could go to see lots of different data sets and lots of different contributions. This isn't something that's easily done right now, and so it's not like with the EU Ingenious community cluster community, we're not going to be able to solve that issue by ourselves. But the idea is that over time, just as more projects join and we kind of move forward into the future, the idea is to kind of slowly develop a more developed ecosystem for showing off the results. But yeah.
But to, sorry, one of the topics that I was going to say aside from this is, and it was a discussion last week that I brought in the Diversa Print final event. It was probably we also, all of us benefit as a battery community to bring the clusters together, because since we are touching different topics and we don't share among clusters what we are doing, probably we will discover a lot of things that are useful for the development of each one of the areas. And I think that's not, let's say, a topic for us, but a topic even for BEPA or for European Commission to try to bring an event like RTR, but focus on clusters or in knowledge.
I don't know how to solve that issue, because that's a very complex one. Because even while, it could be good for BEPA to encourage that, is it necessarily their role?
Yes.
Is it necessarily in their mandate? And this is something that we do discuss, in like the policy task force and that kind of stuff in BEPA. But at the end of the day, this is I guess you could say, a project level issue. And so I'm not necessarily sure whether it's really within the remit of that. On the other hand, I think ultimately one of the problems we would have in terms of a response from the Commission would be, well, do a CSA.
Yes.
And so I think one of the issues that we have is and this is just a comment for anybody who's considering getting their feet wet in doing clusters, is that if you're new to it, stay focused just on the calls themselves. If there are 3 calls or 3 projects that are funded underneath the call, my advice would be to start out just with those 3 projects. Stay focused until you get the lessons learned, and the next thing is to reach out to the other clusters. Your best contacts are your project officers, because they can always put you in contact with representatives from other neighboring clusters. On batteries, you can always find people like us at Battery Innovation Days, because Battery Heroes and Colabat, EU Ingenious, we've been, we're usually there. And, we're always happy to exchange with new clusters. But yeah, stay focused, and then over time, start to consider, what is the long-term evolution. On the other hand, as I said, we're going to be opening up EU and Genius to other projects. And so, if you're in a call where there's only one, maybe two, maybe three, or if you just don't want to bother with it, you can come talk to us, and we can discuss it. We have absolutely no objections to that,
No fees included.
and no fees, yeah, and no fees, yeah. This, yeah. Don't get me started. But yeah, it is, and I will point out that, yeah, like, once Tempest is done, my participation of chair is, of the cluster will just be my contribution, but it won't be, like funded within a project, so, and at that point, I've told the others that if they want to take over as chair while they're still in a project, I don't have any objections to that, but I will always, also stay on as chair in the project, or in the cluster. That's not an issue. The other thing I want to point out, I guess you could say from an organizational issue, is that one of the real big benefits for us as a cluster, especially within batteries, has been the ability, from, I guess you could say, from a financial impact standpoint, to participate with a stand in Battery Innovation Days. Because stands are not cheap. This year it was, what, 8,000 euros?
It jumped to the double from one year
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
other.
yeah. They literally doubled the fee. And so it was 8,000 euros, and the year before it was 3,750 or 4,000.
4,000, I think.
Yeah. But the thing is that the mechanism now exists where we can split the fees across the five of us. And so that makes it far more affordable and tolerable, because, I would say that just from a project coordinator, paying like 8,000 euros a year for a stand at Battery Innovation Days or another event is getting quite excessive. But that is where one of the places where the power of clusters comes into play, because it makes it more affordable, and it also, there's a very nice ability to present the totality of the results.
But I think also one point, jumping a little bit out of the technical area, it's also, and I'm talking by my personal experience, it brought the 5 projects together.
Yes.
Also as coordinators, and I think it created a good relationship between projects. We could share a lot of things. We even do the webinars for the dissemination, and it was very nicely organized by everyone.
I would say that our first event together was when we were collectively invited to go to the GRC.
Yes.
And present our projects. And that was a very neat experience, because that was the first time we were all together in one room and we got to meet and we got to chat. And I would say that over the years of doing the GRC event, Battery Innovation Days now 3 times?
Yes.
3 times?
No,
2 times?
2 times.
2023 by yourself.
Yeah. 2
So-
times as a cluster.
Yeah, so, okay, so 2 times as a cluster, and then RTR as well.
Yes.
Because, and I will point out to you, one thing I want to point out about RTR, cluster tables are free at RTR. This is a big bonus. It has been a very, very enriching experience, because you get a bunch of people who are very, very interested in innovation and novel developments, and it's really a very rich discussion, and it's always great to be around everybody in the clusters.
I think more and more it needs to jump out of being a checkbox to put a check to say, okay, we comply with clustering, it was done, to be something useful towards the projects and
Yeah.
also the battery community.
Yeah.
Because if not, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I do want to touch on another point. We did discuss this a while back because this question was raised by a project officer at one point about the idea of, what is the future for collaborative exploitation or that kind of stuff. Now, I will say that from a practical standpoint, we've learned that it's not easy because when you write these projects, you don't go into them saying, okay, I know that this project is going to be financed by the CEA, this project is me, or run by the CEA, this one run by Avesta, this one run by Rescol. And so the constraints related to background and foreground IP and all of that it's too prohibitive.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, where there is a huge added benefit is that every time you're at these events, and for example, Battery Innovation Days, if two or three of us are sitting in a conference, and one of us has an idea like, that's cool, and then you start to get the gears turning, and you start seeing Project 1, Project 2, Project 3 being submitted with multiple different ideas coming from different projects. And so that's, to me, that's the more practical approach to collaborative exploitation. It's not what I would consider true exploitation, but I think it's the only practical approach at this point for pushing technologies further up the TRL level, especially in the case of everything in EU Ingenious. I should have pointed this out earlier. All of the projects in EU Ingenious end at TRL 5. And so there is room for further development and maturing them in later on projects.
Yeah, and I think one topic that inside each project we already tackle, and this was one of the topics discussed last week, about how synergies work, and Ingenious is an example of these synergies.
Yeah.
They start in the projects as bringing together a lot of expertise in several areas to answer a topic.
Yeah.
But I think if we bring even more synergy, that it's how Ingenious brings together a lot of partners around, because in here we see, and I'm talking by extended, you have a lot of other expertise that we are not tackling in extended. For
Yeah.
example, the enclosure, it's something that
Yeah.
here it's completely disruptive approach,
Mhm.
and that we are not tackling in that way. I think if we merge the 5 projects together, we would have the perfect battery pack
Yeah.
in the end.
I mean, you look at VersaPrint, for example, with, and this hasn't really been brought up, but there was VersaPrint's event last week. One of the really innovative things two innovative things that they developed in VersaPrint is, first of all, the microfluidic SOC approach for the cells, and the second thing is the emergency gas evacuation system. And again, those are completely different things. And, so when you look at the sum total of all of the stuff that comes out of eIngenious, I always like to come back to this idea of we've just got a box and we're filling it full of tools. And, maybe not all of these tools are the best for a specific application, but at the end of the day, our goal is to provide people with, a mix and match set of tools that can be used to produce the best battery packs coming out of Europe.
Yes. And if we want to tackle the challenge that we have right now with the market and being, let's say, beyond what is already developed in Asia, I think we need to present these added value solutions
Yes.
together,
Yeah.
because
there is no choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's the way for us to scale up things. It's to work together more and more. And probably I'm talking a little bit without knowing what is going to be the framework or the next framework of projects. But I heard that
Yeah.
the idea was to bring more partners together and to have fewer projects and bigger ones.
Yeah.
I don't know if that will help,
I don't-
but in some point, I think the clusters are
If you want my honest opinion, it won't help.
no. It
It won't.
it will be
because
difficult to handle.
what it will actually do is it will centralize too much around one or two projects. And at the end of the day, what we need, I mean, it's well known that if you just look at innovation in Europe, in what type of company do you have the most dynamic and the fastest development? It's always in the SMEs. Because they're always, the fastest, the hungriest. And I think the kind of the same approach kind of applies to projects as well. When you have, personally, I think between 5 and 7 million euros is probably the sweet spot for projects. Because when you start looking at the, say, a 15 million project, okay, by default, you're looking usually at 25 partners. Already from an administrative standpoint, it starts to get very complicated. And you end up with these major monolithic things. And the other thing is that how many projects are going to be funded at that level? Very often when you see that, they're only funding one or two, which means that the possibilities for clustering become extremely limited. And at the end of the day, you don't end up with the opportunities like you see in EU Ingenious, where we ended up with 5 projects which are almost totally different in their approach to the same problem, but are so complementary. And for me, I think that's the biggest value add, is if you look at, 5 times 6, so 30 million euros. So 5 projects at 6 versus 1 times 30. I think the value add for Europe in terms of getting out a variety of different viewpoints and different approaches is actually far better in 5 times 6 than 1 times 30.
And I think you are also diluting one big factor in a research project. That is, it's a research project, it can fail. If
Yep.
you are financing one big project of 15 million, you will fail in one project of 15 million.
It will fail catastrophically, yeah.
If not, you are failing in a small project, and you will have the opportunity to fund the other ones that probably they had success.
Yeah.
So this is pro and con that it's going to be I think the challenge for the future. But I still defend, and I think we agree in this, that the clusters can be a very big solution to this problem.
Yeah.
If they are, I don't know if they are policy, or if they create some policy around this to help clusters, even because, for example, we have now the example, like you said, we will have Battery Innovation Days 2026.
Yeah.
Ingenious are not going to be there, at least as a cluster, because we are...
Yeah, because, and that goes back to, because we have essentially 3 projects that will be finished by that time, 4?
Even before
Yeah,
the
and
Battery
so,
Innovation Days.
one project is not going to pay 8,000 euros. It's actually more than that now. I think it's 10K.
I didn't saw the price. I received...
I think one table is now 9 or 10K this year. And so, one project is not going to foot the bill. I mean, since I'll be there, I may try to negotiate internally with the powers that be, to at least have some sort of presence. But and that's ultimately the problem. Now, on the other hand, if we manage to add more projects in, if we get 3 or 4 projects to join into EU Ingenious this year, then we can say, hey, we'll have a stand at EU Ingenious. And at that point, I'll be present with the others, and we'll start showing them off.
And in that point, it's also feasible, because if all of us can participate as participants, not having a cluster, we can help with organization without having the cost, because other projects will be the highlighted ones.
Exactly.
And we will be the legacy.
Yeah,
we will be there to do the handover.
We'll be the legacy people.
We will be the elders.
Like
And yeah, the other thing I want to point out is that one place I think there could be some structural and organizational improvement. Uh, it's not really to complain. It's more to say there's just room for improvement. Is the way things like Horizon Results Booster work with clusters. Well, no, I would say just from a structural standpoint, because, like, how, okay, theoretically, Horizon Results Booster could be a massive value add to a cluster in terms of, for example, assisting with outreach or preparing a cluster level video or that kind of stuff. And, that is why the commission supports it. But I'll give you a good example of one of the complications. If you want to apply for Horizon Results Booster, you have to apply with an ongoing project number. Well, clusters don't have project numbers. So if you've already applied as a project, you can't reuse that project number to file as a cluster. And so that's why I want to say there's room for organizational improvement to better integrate or to better make available the resources of programs like Horizon Results Booster to aid clusters. Yeah.
I would say that there is also another improvement, probably a little bit bigger, that is the service that is delivered. It fluctuates a lot. We know that we are all different. We approach things different, and consultants are are one of that part. But we feel that in some points you got, for example, you need to be lucky and to get a very engaged consultant that really likes the projects or the cluster.
But on the other hand, that's more of a structural
Yeah.
or issue with HRB itself. But I would just say, without going down that rabbit hole too much, is just saying, like, just from a simple interface standpoint, it's right now very complicated because, for example, I, as the chair, wanted to set up with Horizon Results Booster. However, I had already made the request for HRB support for the TEMPEST project. So I couldn't do that. However, Bruno had not yet, he had not done Horizon Results Booster, so he used his number for project to do the request for the cluster. Which is confusing because then Horizon Results Booster gets confused because they think he's the chair of the cluster, and so they always talk to him and not me. And so that's why I said there are things that could be improved.
Yes.
And I think that the program should evolve. And okay, maybe if it's going to be an HRB 3 with the new framework program, this is one of the things that needs to be taken into consideration. And, perhaps there could be other mechanisms put into place by the commission to better aid clusters. And I think that's one of the main things. Another thing that would be good is I don't know how to do it. Whether it requires collaborating with the various DGs, whether it requires collaborating just through the project officers, is to have better infrastructure for communication about what clusters do exist. Because when you're new to a project, you don't know what's out there. And I will say that our project officer was very good about informing us that you should contact, this person from this cluster, this person from this cluster. But it's not always the case, and when you're new to it, you don't know what you're getting into. And the most important thing, if you're new to the clustering issue, is building on lessons learned. Because I will say that we have had our lessons learned in this. Good things and bad things. And it's one of the things that I find good about this discussion is what we have learned and what we think could improve the process. And we're always happy to share, with others. But I think there's more that could be done to facilitate the communication between the various clusters, because, for example, the event at Battery Innovation Days last year was hosted by a cluster. So that cluster had to pay for the organizational issues, and that kind of stuff. And I will say that, when if I'm writing a proposal, I'm not necessarily setting aside that massive budget for that kind of thing. That not everybody thinks about that, ahead of time. And so it's complicated because imagine if you have 5 projects. Is everybody? You can't communicate with each other in terms of funding for clustering. And so, you can't have one person that says, okay, well, I'm going to be the chair of the cluster, so I'm going to set aside 100K for, big clustering activities. And what happens if everybody does that?
But I think it should be interesting. I don't know what is the mechanism, or because I think even CSAs are not that case. But to have some, like I said again, BEPA, whatever is the entity, to do like a cascade funding for the clusters. It could be interesting to have that fund available in somewhere. And
but that would be through a CSA, because you have to have the FSTP in the yeah.
But it would be interesting because you could apply as a cluster to say, okay, now we have this cluster, and we should have this money available, even if we don't put them in our project.
At the end of the day, then that kind of would be like, for example, under the auspices of Battery 2030.
Probably.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting, and going back also to try to understand what or which clusters are already working in or whatever, to create like a Cordis, but for clusters. But for that we need to make official clusters. Like I said, we don't have a number, we don't have.
But at that point, what is the mechanism?
To make it official.
What defines an official cluster? Because obviously you don't want to go down the road of incorporating, that kind of thing. Because at that point, that's a whole different story. And so, but on the other hand, you are right that clusters, since they represent kind of a pseudo entity outside the individual projects, they kind of have a life of their own. And normally they should live on beyond the projects, unless they are a very clearly defined scope and nobody wants to continue on. And nothing against that. If everybody goes into that and they understand that, that's no problem. But there should probably be a better way to more clearly, as you say, define the clusters, define what themselves as an entity. And then, for example, in Cordis or some other, something else to say, this is the repository of ongoing clusters under Horizon Europe. And, that way you're saying, okay, I'm a battery project and I'm new to this. I can look for these battery clusters with, the context being this person, this person, this person, this person.
I think because you also have the issue, normally you can be reached out as a coordinator by people outside to ask you things about the project. Normally I receive some contacts to extend it onto other projects.
Yeah.
But for a cluster you cannot receive anything because you don't exist officially.
Right, yeah. And it's actually one of the things that kind of is a slowing effect on the multiplier effect that you want to get out of these clusters. So, and the other thing is, let's be honest, in 99% of the cases, the people who represent the projects in the clusters are the coordinators. And I'll be honest, at a certain amount of time, the coordinators only have so much time. And so it's kind of a tightrope walk there.
I fully agree with you. It's difficult, and I'm feeling that because I'm with Ingenious, but I'm also with another cluster.
Yeah.
And it's difficult right now. For example, I had to ask to one of our partners to take care of. We are going to produce a joint paper to put out what is going to be the state of the art that we are developing.
Yeah.
but I cannot have the time to handle that, and I had to pass, and I fully understand.
Yeah.
And if you are coordinating more than one project, it will start to be a nightmare of approach.
Yeah.
A couple of questions.
All right.
Do you want to close the discussion?
Yeah, we can close the discussion, move on to questions.
So the first question, to many of the speakers actually, from your experience in Tempest, what would you say is missing in terms of policies, standards, regulations in the European battery sector to fully unlock the potential of these technologies?
Okay, my response to this is probably going to be complex and convoluted. Okay, one of the biggest problems we have right now in Europe, and I'll start with the automotive industry, is that we have many different automotive manufacturers, but each of them has, and don't get me wrong, you know, everybody's entitled to their own approach, but if we look at competition from China, they have essentially a single philosophy imposed on them from above. Now, I'm not saying that that is what needs to be here, but what we do need is we need to start to come to an agreement on things. We can't have, for example, 8 different charging standards. And, you know, along the same lines, at the end of the day, it would be actually useful to start to standardize battery packs in certain configurations, because this would be a massive boost just to recycling and maintenance efforts. Now, I understand that, you know, different chassis configurations have different kind of things, but simplifying that approach would take a lot of the issues. I think it would sideline a lot of the other issues in terms of design, because if, for example, a car designer knew that, okay, I can choose from battery configurations of, say, 50, 75, 125, or 100, 125, 150 kilowatts, and they're available in these dimensions, these dimensions, these dimensions, and they're already preconceived, more or less, with certain specifications, that would actually simplify things. I understand as well that there's a lot of internal competition across the various car manufacturers. But the biggest problem that we have right now is that very often this problem to agree on certain fundamental issues actually we end up stabbing ourselves in the foot. And like, you know, again, going back to the charging issue, how do you develop a coherent charging infrastructure that anybody who buys an electric vehicle can get in a car in Belgium and drive to Slovenia, for example, and along the way make sure that they'll be able to charge at any electric charging point without having to have adapter X, Y, Z, and Q. And that's one, you know, that's one example of the issues, I think.
But I think in that point, for example, European Commission is doing one thing in one side and bringing another topic, a little bit my technology nerd coming out, that is you enforced, for example, in all cell phones to have USB-C as the main charger.
Well,
That worked.
yeah, yes,
Now
it did.
you are going to impose until 2027 that all mobile phones will have to have replaceable batteries.
Yeah.
And if people want to come to Europe or we have Apple, I think we don't have any manufacturer of cell phones at Europe at least, they will have to comply with this. I think it's probably the easiest way, it's like you are saying, to have charging standards, to have battery standards also, since we are going for digital passport, I think.
I can always trot out my extremely controversial idea as well, and that is the idea. And I will preface with the fact that, you know, okay, maybe not it's the best example, But I'm starting to seriously wonder whether or not Europe needs kind of like an Airbus model for just the manufacturing of battery cells and battery packs. So a single European entity that oversees the various gigafactories and has the contribution and the political power that is contributed from the various countries, not just one, but many, and which would provide cell and pack manufacturing services, especially to SMEs, because that's where you're going to see a lot of the really fast development. And that's what we need. We have to be competitive, especially against China. And so we have to find ways to reduce the barrier for new technologies to get to market quickly.
But for example, getting to the top of standardization,
Yeah.
I'm doing some part of that work in another project, and I discovered very interesting things. That is, for example, going to a niche that it's the BMS. If you go out to the market and try to find how many standards
Oh, yeah, yeah.
there are for BMS, it's more than 50 standards
Yeah.
for everything. But then, for example, you are trying to develop a new standard. The way to develop a new standard, it's strange, because you need to start from the national country, and for example, in a project, it's strange how this will be triggered. Only one party will try to do that, and then it can take 10 years.
And what makes it more complicated is the multitude of applications. So you have standards for certification that apply to aircraft, that apply to automobiles, to maritime, to rail. Now, I fully understand that there are very good reasons, for example, why aircraft are different from cars. But, for example, cars, maritime, rail, you
Should be,
could start to move towards common standards on that. So, I don't know, do we have anything? Okay.
So the second and I think last question, it's, well, two questions actually. Is all the data generated in the project open access? In order to make Europe competitive, we are in an uncomfortable position to make data accessible, but still don't make it easy for other countries outside the EU to access sensitive the information. How did you approach this aspect during the project?
Oh, this is a question that is near and dear to me. Okay, I'll start on this one right away, because if you look at the various other, all the members along the table have heard me repeatedly go on about yes, all data by default in Horizon Europe is open, with the limitation of whether or not it is important for intellectual property and exploitation. On the other hand, there's the problem that making everything open means we can potentially just shoot ourselves in the foot with respect to competition from China and the United States and other countries. This is something that, as I said, is near and dear to me, because I actually have been, actually actively discussing this question internally with some people at BEPA and elsewhere, because it's a very complicated issue. One solution that has been discussed is, for example, could BEPA, which has a quite, since you have to be a member of BEPA, could BEPA have a repository for certain more restricted results? But the limitation to that is it becomes pay to play. You have to be a member to access that data, which is not a good thing, and that makes it, by definition, not open. And I will say we have to make certain sets of data open. And in Tempest, we have been working very hard to make as much contribution back to the community as we can. But on the other hand, there are certain things that we have decided, okay, this is going to be exploited, we have to keep this closed. But at the end of the day, I will agree 100%. It is a very difficult tightrope to walk. And I'm trying to find a solution to it. And it's not an easy one to handle. At the end of the day, it will probably be some sort of something to handle directly with the commission, some sort of pseudo Zenodo with a more restricted access. But I don't know how to do it.
I think main problem is how to limit that to be only
Right.
accessed by Europe.
Right, and
I think that's the main barrier.
and even if you, for example, let's say you geofence it, a VPN will just get you around that. So
Only if you create a mechanism that you can only access with our ID cards. And
well, there is that. I mean, but then again, even that can be to some degree. You
Hackable.
can't block everything. But it's an extraordinarily complicated issue, and it's as I said, it's something I have been thinking about a lot. And we have actually kind of discussed it from time to time in EU Ingenious, but again, it's not necessarily our remit to find that solution. Right now, what we're trying to do as we just finish up our individual projects is to say, okay, these are the information that we're making open. And so we want to make it more visible. But on the other hand, if we go back to more restricted stuff, there's always restricted stuff that we still want to share with community. While in Tempest, we are sharing a lot of battery testing data. That's not always the case in projects. A lot of times the battery testing data is very closed, for one reason or another. And on the other hand, if there was a secure way to exchange at the European level this data, I think it would be a big motivating force.
But for example, we have always the question that is European Commission. Let's say it's the owner of all of our results, restricted or not. They are the owner of the results.
Yep, they pay.
I think in the end they are the ones that can create this big library or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and even to evaluate with the players.
Yeah, and
What can be done to be shared with the SMEs, like you said, that are the ones that can probably speed up some of the developments.
yeah.
But it's a very difficult task, and I think
Yeah, and and that's why I said, even though organizations like BEPA, they could play a role, at the end of the day, it's not necessarily in their remit.
no.
Because it then becomes pay for play.
I think this is something that even the country members of European Commission needs to discuss
Yeah.
and to try to create a solution, even if it's an internal, if it's country by country.
But if it's country by country, then it starts to become competitive between the countries, and people start data hoarding.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not ideal.
It's actually 1 p.m.,
Oh,
so perfect timing.
yeah.
I just want to thank all the participants that joined us this morning, the speakers, of course, our cluster, the advisory board, the region Nouvelle-Aquitaine, sorry for my French, for
Nouvelle-Aquitaine.
hosting us, Nouvelle-Aquitaine. I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry. And the material will be online next week on the YouTube channel, on the website with all the presentations. And our project will finish next Thursday, so it's bittersweet. It's a bittersweet moment.
Tick, tick,
Yeah,
tick.
clock is ticking. We still need to
We got
write
stuff
some
to do.
deliverables,
Yeah.
prepare for the review meeting.
Yeah.
But all the information will be on the website.
Yeah, and please, the other thing I want to point out is, at least as I said, with respect to Tempest, there's a lot of stuff that's available on Zenodo in terms of our open data. So there are data sets for battery testing. There are papers that have been published. There's actually some schematics as well. So
The links are also on the chat
yeah.
on Zoom.
So be aware of that.
Yeah. And we also share the Ingenious Zenodo link.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm chasing after people to cross-publish to that.
upload.
Yeah. Okay. Chase.
So thank you so much, online participants. Bye-bye.